So I'm going to start by the general import settings and how to import these guys and then bake down the textures. So let's get started. So first things first, when you're going to be importing anything into Substance Painter for texturing and texture baking anything, make sure it's always an editable mesh. I will be sending you a file with all of the different pieces. So as you can see here, there's 9 different ears, different shapes, sizes, all that stuff. I'll be sending you a file with all of these included, and they will all be editable mesh because you're just going to be doing the texturing. So you're going to want to export this as an editable mesh. Okay, I got a folder here for temporary exports, which I will be using. And we're going to want to have this one as an FBX. Okay, so let's do this one as Mogwai body 01. All right. Yep, everything's looking good on the export. Okay. Now let's jump into Substance Painter. Start a new scene. Now, you're going to want to keep this at Unreal Engine 4. That's what we're going to be using for these. 4K textures, and the rest can stay exactly as it is. We're not going to mess with that too much. This is where you bring in your file. So I'm going to go to Training Files and find the body that we just exported. Get that opened up here. And this is what we get. So it's looking pretty plain. It's got its own base material on it right now. The first thing you're going to want to do right when you bring it into Substance Painter is bake the textures down, just in case you forget. So let's do that really quick. We don't need a layer right now. We're going to get rid of that. Texture set settings. Okay. So if you keep scrolling down, you'll see a Bake Mesh Maps. You're going to want to click that and turn off everything except for normal. Okay. We want these to be 4K. We want the dilation to be around 6. Now, usually this is where you put your high-res sculpts or ZBrush sketches or whatever you want to call them, the high-res mesh here, and then you would bake them onto the low-res here and then bake those textures. But because these are already pretty low and they're clean meshes, we're going to use the low poly as the high poly. We're just going to select that and then head down to by mesh name, because we do want to keep these things separate. The subsampling, we'll go high, we'll go 8. And this should be okay. I think that this is going to be fine. So let's go ahead and bake the normal and see what our results are looking like. Okay, here we go. Now, like I said, because there's not a lot of detail, the normal map's going to be pretty plain, if not completely plain. It all depends on if there's like some extra details that it needs to bake in. But for the body, it looks like it's pretty plain, which is okay. And now we're going to go through the rest of the maps and bake the world space, the ambient occlusion, curvature, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go through and bake these, but I'm also going to keep it recording in case I change any of these settings so that you can see what I'm actually doing for each one. So the only thing I've changed so far is the settings in the common tab here, which is all we need for the world space because they don't really have any settings there. So let's go ahead and bake the world space now. Okay, that's looking good. World space map. This is what you get with that. Excellent. The next few I usually do is the curvature and position. The reason being the ambient occlusion and the thickness take a really long time. So let me go through what I do in the curvature. So the curvature, make sure it's only same mesh name. And you want to generate this from the normal map. For the position, this is fine. So curvature and position selected. Now I can bake those with the changes I made to follow the normal map. And let's bake those. Great. And now the last two, ambient occlusion. This one you want to have by mesh name. By mesh name. I think that's good for that. And thickness is by mesh name as well. Okay. Yeah, everything else is looking good. Yeah. So let's bake these out. So this actually might take a little while, so I am just going to pause the video and then come back when these maps are completed. Now that we have all of the maps baked and good to go in all these slots here, the ID map is not important. That's if we have a bunch of things from another program that we need to keep separate in different like colored ID maps. So we don't need that, but we do need everything else for the generators and stuff that we use to texture these guys. So right now I would like to walk you through just the general setup in Substance Painter to keep it nice and clean, and essentially how we're going to be working on these. So let's start with a fill layer and a folder. So this is essentially going to be the setup for all of these. So this is the fill layer. And then here is the folder. So what we're going to do is we're just going to call this body, and we're just going to call this base. Okay. Now what we do is we slide this guy inside the folder so that we keep that nice and clean. And then we're always going to want to have a black mask on top. Okay. So this one, I want to have this as the whole body right now. So let's go into the color and change that to a blue. Let's just go with that for now. And you'll notice that because there's a black mask, nothing happened. This is where all the masks come into play here, and they are very powerful for keeping things separate, clean, and neat while you're texturing. So this base color is the only thing I changed. So this map is completely black, and now I'm going to start editing this. So you'll notice at the bottom here, you'll have a black and white slider. When you're working with masks, it's just going to be black and white. And then if I were to say do white, painting white on the mesh, you're going to see the blue come through underneath, right? So this is kind of how we're going to keep things nice and clean. So for example, if I want to fill this whole thing white. Okay, so now you'll see the whole thing is blue. And if I remove this mask, the same thing. So white is going to be visible, black is going to be invisible for these layers that the way that we have them set up. Okay, So now on top of this, I want to make another layer, fill layer, and another folder. Okay, so this one, I'm going to slide in there, call this base, and then call this actually, let's go just hands. Okay, and then for this one, let's do the base color. Let's just go red for example purposes. We're going to add a black mask to this, which will make it disappear. And now we're going to just paint on white. Okay, so here, this is just like the symmetry thing. You can click that on and off if you want to do something. If the mesh is symmetrical, it's a little easier and it saves time if you want to do symmetry, but it's also nice to like not have everything look completely symmetrical. But for our purposes, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so we got, we'll do the hands and the tummy. There's like a little layer here. Yeah, looks like we got most of it. Okay. So now we got the hands and the tummy. And anything that we want to do within this is already masked off. So now I can work within here and just start kind of layering things on. So for example, if I want to add another color to this or like a gradient or something, I can come in here and then add a black mask already within this layer, right? I can add another black mask to just this layer. And then you can see it doesn't actually go outside of the boundaries that we created, which is going to be a really powerful tool for when you're texturing, to have that control of, you know, not having to bleed into other things and have your everything so neat. All you have to do is worry about if the mask is tight, and as long as the mask is tight and good, then everything else falls in place and you don't have to really worry about that. So the initial mask is very, very important for these layers. And this is essentially how we're going to be setting up all of the layers, the texture sets, nice and neat in mask stacks, essentially. And I think at this point, it's a good time to go into your baking scenes and your texturing scenes, because these files are going to need to have 2 scenes each, one for baking and then one for your actual texture. So I think it's a good time now to go into creating the short fur for one of the characters.